Hello everybody, so let me tell you a story about J.K. Rowling. So J.K. Rowling is a children's author, and in the run-up to the release of her book The Ickabog, which was intended for quite small children, she got lots of art sent to her, lots of fan art sent to her, and she would kind of promote it on her Twitter and say, you know, this is a really lovely image, thank you for that. Obviously very nice for the children. But some number of trans activists decided that to spite J.K. Rowling, they would basically sabotage these nice little tweets by covering them with pornography, by tweeting large amounts of pornography. And J.K. Rowling, of course, dealt with this without drawing much attention to it because it's disgusting and it doesn't deserve any attention. So she presumably just reported it and made sure it was gotten rid of as soon as possible. Now, later on, somebody then accused J.K. Rowling of not caring about people with mental health issues, I believe, was the specific topic. And J.K. Rowling said, look, I've not brought public attention to some of the other stuff these people have done, which has been truly horrendous, but I'm going to go in, I'm going to fully, go on a proper tirade about this because I really do care about this issue, and to say that I don't, I just need to speak up on this. Right, so I hope we're all following along so far. Now, later on, somebody called, I believe, Juan Mac, I believe is the name. I can't be bothered to look it up because I don't care. Tweeted a out of context quote from J.K. Rowling's initial rant, where J.K. Rowling had basically referred to how she did not see fit to bring public attention to some of the disgusting things that trans activists had been doing previously. And he took this to basically out of context imply that J.K. Rowling in effect didn't care about these disgusting things that these trans activists were doing. Now, J.K. Rowling then retweeted this person and said, hey, you're taking me out of context, you're misrepresenting what I'm saying, that's libel, so I would just make sure you're a little bit cautious about how you proceed with this. But don't worry, this hero, he said, I shall not be deterred, I will leave the tweet up, and lots of people will see it, and that will show J.K. Rowling. And then, for a while, I guess maybe things were happening in the background. And then this guy, possibly yesterday, I'm trying to think about how the timeline works out, basically tweeted saying, hey guys, when I posted that quote of J.K. Rowling, completely taken out of context, I misrepresented her, and that was libelous, and I'm sorry, and I've now taken it down, or something to that effect. I'm not going off the script here. So that's basically the description of the events that happened. Now, let's get into the analysis, because a lot of people have come away from this saying, oh good, somebody who unambiguously engaged in an act of libel has retracted his statement. It didn't have to go to court. It didn't have to kind of harm him, I guess, any more than it needed to, any more than kind of wounding his pride by making him back down on this issue. And it seems that J.K. Rowling has both maturely and effectively opposed this complete misrepresentation of what she said. But there are some people who are instead saying that J.K. Rowling is an evil bully who attacked a gay man, because it matters that he's gay because identity politics, a gay man who was just quoting what she said, her very own words. I mean, let me tell you, okay, they're going on to the original tweet by J.K. Rowling and saying, hey, look, these are the words that you said. That must mean that you've committed libel too, because that's how it works, obviously. If somebody says the words that were quoted out of context, literally in the original context of where they said them, that's the same thing as somebody taking those words completely out of context. Duh. So when this guy first took these quotes out of context, I already made a video explaining the original context and also going into some other criticisms of J.K. Rowling, so I will link to that now. But I also just wanted to touch on a few things regarding the fact that, yes, that quote is out of context. So first things first, because this was all happening yesterday and it was kind of interesting to follow, I actually ended up just telling some people I know personally about what was unfolding. And these were people who, you know, really didn't know anything about what was going on. And I told 3 people. Now what was interesting is that the first person I explained this to, I sort of went through and explained the exact words that she'd said. And when I got to the bit about ignoring pornography tweeted at children, this person didn't stop me and go, hold on a minute, what? She ignored pornography tweeted at children? That's terrible. Why would she do that? Because, of course, I was explaining it in the initial context. I was explaining it in the context of all the events that had happened and explaining, of course, the context of her initial tweet. And unsurprisingly, yeah, the person didn't stop me and go, what? She ignored pornography? That's a terrible thing to do. And I kind of thought to myself, you know, I bet that if I just told a few more people about this story, then none of them would find it remotely kind of note that J.K. Rowling made that specific remark, because they would understand it in the context of what she was saying. So I did. I explained it to 2 other people, explained the story to them, and yeah, the exact same thing happened. None of them stopped me to say, hold on a minute, what do you mean she ignored pornography tweeted at children? That's a terrible thing for her to have done. That's very morally damning. Now, interestingly, one person did stop me and go, hold on a minute, they tweeted pornography at children? That's really disgusting of them to have done that. So apparently, based on my sample size of 3, people are immediately able to understand the context of what J.K. Rowling was saying and do not consider it to be in any way objectionable, because of course, how would you if you understood the context of what was being said? But at least one person, and I imagine if I told more people, then I'd get this reaction from more people, stopped and were like, hold on a minute, what do you mean they tweeted pornography at children? That's disgusting. And I imagine the 2 people who didn't possibly didn't even stop me to say, what do you mean that's disgusting? Because it's kind of just a thing that you might even expect at this point. Now, basically, if you haven't seen my original video, I'll just give a brief summary of how context works here. So basically, to ignore something is relative depending on the context. And basically, I pointed out how sometimes ignoring something means not even thinking about it. You just try not to think about it at all. You're not paying any attention to it. And I give the example of kind of if something causing you mental anguish, you say, well, just ignore it. Now, sometimes ignoring something can be not saying something about something, not verbally acknowledging it. And then sometimes ignoring it can mean something else. It can mean not physically reacting to something. And one example I thought which helps illustrate this is the seemingly self-contradictory phrase, I'll ignore that. So a lot of the time if you have a conversation with somebody and maybe they say something that kind of like offends you, or is, designed to make fun of you, and you may interpret it either in kind of like a joking way, or you may actually be offended by it. But obviously, if you're kind of in the middle of a conversation, you don't want to kind of stop the conversation to have a proper go at this person, or, like in some way react to what they said. So you just say, I'll ignore that, and then you continue. So let's say, for example, if I'm trying to talk about why I'm a gender critical person, and then somebody says, oh, it's probably just because you hate trans people and want them dead, I might just say, I'll ignore that, and then continue, because I don't care to entertain such a stupid kind of claim. Now, what you may notice is that I'm literally not ignoring that statement. I'm drawing specific attention to it by saying, I'll ignore that, which is what I mean when I say it's seemingly self-contradictory. I'm bringing attention to it in the very act of saying that I'm going to ignore it. But it's pretty obvious what I mean, which is I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about why I believe what I believe, or whatever else. And therefore, I'm not going to stop to start talking about this other thing. I'm going to ignore it. And that's just one example, but it perfectly shows how you can ignore things in different senses. And I gave other examples in my video about how, for example, if you react physically to something, where previously you only verbally acknowledged it, you may claim that you ignored it, even while you verbally acknowledged it. So just to bring this back to J.K. Rowling, she basically had a quite substantial Twitter thread about this one particular claim that she really objected to. And she basically really laid into this person and this accusation to say this is complete nonsense. So within that context, when she says, I've ignored X, Y, Z, she's not necessarily saying that she didn't do anything. She's clearly not saying she didn't think about those things. She's possibly, you could even say she's not even saying that she may have verbally acknowledged those things in some context. But all she's saying is, I didn't go on a massive, intense tirade about these things because I didn't want to draw attention to them. And of course, it's pretty obvious why you would not want to draw attention to people tweeting pornography at children. And I even saw a TRA say, well, surely if there were people tweeting pornography at children, J.K. Rowling would have wanted to direct her followers to these people so that her followers could, attack them or whatever. And I was like, are you serious? Are you seriously saying that you think that J.K. Rowling would have wanted to direct people to accounts tweeting pornography? Is that honestly what you think? And it just shows like they have, I don't even know what to do with that. Because it's pretty obvious that what J.K. Rowling did just makes sense. She's saying like, look, I didn't acknowledge these things, but this thing, this is something I really care about. I'm going to acknowledge it just to explain the situation. And it doesn't necessarily mean that she doesn't care about the other things. It's just something where talking about them is kind of pointless. Like, what would even be the point in J.K. Rowling bringing huge amounts of attention to people tweeting pornography at children? Ultimately, I suspect, apart from anything else, a lot of the kind of trans activists would just say, oh, you're just, why are you bringing a big focus to that? They probably, like, the irony is, if J.K. Rowling did bring massive attention to people tweeting pornography at children, the trans activists would be like, hey, why are you bringing an attention to that? Why are you kind of putting these people front and center? They don't represent us. And actually, if anything, you're just making the situation worse by giving them so much attention. That they would attack her if she actually did try to bring attention to what these people are doing with, sending pornography. So, like, it's not based on principles. It's not based on logic. And it's certainly not based on any degree of, like, moral integrity. It's just about attacking a woman they don't like. I will say that this is probably the kind of greatest singular event in terms of the amount of respect that I have lost for gender identity extremists in general. Because, obviously there are plenty of instances where gender identity extremists will make any kind of normal person lose respect for them. But usually you could say, oh, well, it's just a few of them doing it. Or you can say, well, it's not too stupid of an argument or whatever. But in this case, it's just all of them coming out and just being like, hey, we don't understand anything about context. We don't understand, like, literally they're coming out and they're saying, like, well, it's just the word she tweeted. How can that be a problem? Just retweeting the exact thing she said. And it's like, if you don't understand context, then you literally don't know how the basics of human language work. I don't know, like, I can't, and the problem is it's lots of them doing it. Like, I haven't seen a single gender identity extremist come out and say, actually, this is a pretty rubbish argument against J.K. Rowling. So it seems like maybe they all think it's like a good argument, and certainly a lot of them do. And it's just like, I think that's genuinely, in terms of just lacking basic comprehension about what makes an argument effective, this is the worst singular example of how bad these people are at reasoning and logic that I've ever seen. So yeah, I would say disappointing, but certainly not surprising. But a lot of people have kind of moved on from focusing on specifically what it is that she said and focusing on the fact that she took this action of basically, saying, hey, if you don't take this down, then you're going to be in trouble legally. And they're saying that this is censorship. And particularly they're saying that J.K. Rowling is a hypocrite because she claims that she cares about free speech. And lots of people, of course, J.K. Rowling has been a central figure when it comes to people caring about free speech. Now, this is actually quite an easy issue to address, which is that free speech has never included libel. Like, this seems like such an obvious point, but apparently, like, I don't know, it's a bit weird, because certainly, I mean, in the UK, we also have, like, hate speech legislation, which I think is more controversial. But obviously that would mean in the UK that if you're talking about free speech in a legal sense, well, there's certainly some things that wouldn't include. And if you look at, for example, even in, I think in the US, there's like actively calling for violence against people. I think that is actually illegal in the US. And certainly it is in the UK and much of the EU. If you start actively campaigning for, we've got to commit mass acts of violence against a particular group of individuals, that would be, I think maybe it's classified under hate speech, but it's, I think, usually called like incitement to violence, and that is obviously not okay under free speech. So whenever people talk about free speech, they're already acknowledging limitations to that, just the kind of obvious limitations. And one of those limitations is libel, that basically to lie about somebody, to defame somebody, and seriously like damage their reputation based on falsehoods is something which people should have a right to protect themselves against. And if somebody's going to repeatedly say things about me which aren't true and are offensive, then I have a right to take legal action against that person. So this idea that it's in some way hypocritical for people who believe in free speech to be on board with J.K. Rowling fighting against what has always been understood as an exception to free speech, which is acts of libel, is just complete nonsense. And again, it's just ridiculous that anybody's pointing to this. And I will say, by the way, that my master's was in journalism, and one of the things you really do learn is about kind of the legal limitations to what you can do as a journalist. And you learn, of course, that if you print something which is lying about somebody, if you print something which is not true about somebody and is going to paint them in a negative light, then you can very much get in trouble with that because that is libel. And the other thing you learn, of course, is that if you quote somebody out of context, that can also be libel. it's kind of very clear that when you're quoting somebody, you have to quote them in a way that accurately reflects what they were saying. And by the way, you don't even have to quote them word for word accurately. Within journalism, accurately portraying the spirit of what somebody is saying is more important than kind of accurately portraying the specific words they said. Now, of course, I should clarify, I'm talking about the journalism that you learn about at university in an academic context, which is a very idealized form of journalism. Of course, in reality, there's plenty of instances of journalism which is misleading and not about accurately and fairly representing what people have said. But in principle, you're taught basically you can kind of fiddle around maybe with the order of what people said, maybe change some of the grammar, maybe tidy it up a bit or perhaps condense it a bit. But what you can't do is change somebody's words. Even if you keep the literal words that they said, you can't change kind of the context in which they're presented in a way which fundamentally changes the meaning of what's being said. And obviously, suffice it to say that if J.K. Rowling had said what she said in that initial tweet thread, and all I printed was like my headline, J.K. Rowling, I've ignored porn tweeted at children, I would have probably failed any assignment where that was part of the portfolio. They would have said, hold a minute, it seems like you completely misrepresented what this person said, based on the actual interview transcripts, and therefore this is bad journalism and you have to retake the assignment. I don't think there's any way that anybody who cares about journalism as kind of like an academic discipline, about the kind of idealized form of journalism where libel and misrepresentation are taken seriously as a genuine thing you should avoid doing, I don't see how any of them would let me get away with a complete misrepresentation like that. So that's the free speech issue. It's libel, it's unambiguously libel, and libel has always been an exception to free speech. Now, some people will claim it's not libel, and of course that's nonsense, but the people who claim that have to kind of negotiate around the fact that this person tweeted out an apology and a retraction, which you'd have to think, if it wasn't libel, why would they do that? And this is where the narrative becomes that J.K. Rowling is bullying people with huge amounts of money. And again, I feel like these people must live in fantasy land because they can't genuinely believe that we, a kind of, and I admit we're not perfect in this regard, but a liberal democracy still have a system where you can just launch a completely frivolous lawsuit against somebody and force them to back down. That's not true. Somebody can't just sue anybody for saying, basically anything. There has to be some basis for saying it is indeed libel or slander, depending on the context, but in this context, obviously libel. There has to be some basis for that. And in this case, there was more than some basis. And obviously, maybe if it was kind of ambiguous, then you could kind of see how this guy would be like, I don't want to fight the case. I think I'm in the right, but I'm just going to tweet out a retraction. But what a lot of people are claiming is that this wasn't libel at all. This was obviously not libel. There was no ambiguity to it. This was just tweeting J.K. Rowling's words. So it's not libel at all. And if that's the case, if you actually believe that this wasn't libel at all, that J.K. Rowling had completely no leg to stand on, then I refuse to believe this guy wouldn't have fought the case. And the fact that he didn't fight the case just makes him look like he has absolutely no integrity. But the thing is, these people aren't saying that there is even any ambiguity. They're saying that J.K. Rowling was completely in the wrong, that there was nothing libelous about this, that basically she didn't have any basis for this lawsuit at all. And within that context, if this guy decides that he doesn't want to defend his right to say this thing, that's on him. You can't blame J.K. Rowling for this. If this guy could have easily won the case, which seems to be what a lot of people think, and he just decided, nah, I can't be bothered, I'll just take it down, well, in that case, that's 100% on him. You can't say that's like a bullying thing. It's ultimately the case that he should have been able to win easily, according to these people, and yet he decided that he just couldn't be bothered and he'd rather just take down the tweet. And I wish he would have decided that earlier, and saved everybody a lot of time, but ultimately that's the decision he made, and I don't see how you can blame J.K. Rowling for that. And of course, regarding the financial aspect, if it was really obvious that J.K. Rowling would lose, then there'd be plenty of lawyers who, because lawyers like to work, it's kind of their job, who'd be like, hey, this is a case which I could win easily. Of course, I'll take it, pro bono. And then once we win, J.K. Rowling will be forced to pay the legal fees. So he's quids in. If you are, sorry, I don't know why, I'm assuming the lawyer is a man, and I do apologize for that, because of course there are plenty of female lawyers. But there we go. The lawyer would obviously, have plenty of grounds. If this was just a case of it's clear cut, there's no way this is libel, and you're a lawyer, obviously you know the law. You'd look at this and you'd say, oh, there's no way this is libel, and you'd say, right, I'm going to represent this guy, and ultimately, it doesn't matter how much money J.K. Rowling has, this just isn't libel, we're obviously going to win. There's no way a lawyer wouldn't take this case. So the idea that this guy didn't have any means to defend himself is, of course, complete nonsense. And this is when I bring up the fact that I suspect that this isn't what happened. I mean, as I already pointed out, this unambiguously is libel. So what probably happened is that J.K. Rowling's lawyer maybe laid out to him exactly how little of a case he has. Possibly even this guy actually did shop around for lawyers a bit. I wouldn't be surprised to hear that. And then heard basically from every single lawyer, no, I'm not going to defend you on this because you would lose. I can't represent you for free because I know that ultimately you're going to be the one who loses. You're going to be the one who has to pay the legal fees, and you can't do that. And the guy said, okay, I guess I did commit libel, so I'm going to have to retract the statement. Obviously that's speculation, but I'd imagine if this guy cared enough to keep the tweet up even after J.K. Rowling had directly called him out for it, I don't see why he would just immediately back down without trying to see if he could fight it, and then realizing actually wait, he couldn't because he didn't have a case. But let's just imagine that this did cost money, that this person actually did have to put together some money to fight his case. If he really believed, if it was you know what, no, I'm going to take a stand, don't you think that he'd be able to start a crowdfunding thing or something? His initial tweet was pretty popular. You'd think that, of the thousands of people who liked it, some people would be willing to put their money where their mouth is and say, you know what, yeah, we're going to support this guy, we're going to fight against this thing. So wouldn't he have been able to do it anyway? And I bring this up just because this whole thing shows to me, the lack of conviction that these grifters have. They'll say all of this stuff, but as soon as it comes to a moment where they could actually make a meaningful stand, and it would require hard work of them, then they just decide to give up. And that seems to be the case. It seems like this person, they could have made a stand. They could have said, you know what, I'm taking a stand. I'm right. J.K. Rowling, I'm not taking her out of context. This is what she said, and, I'm going to show that her frivolous lawsuit, her completely vexatious nonsense lawsuit, has no basis. I'm going to prove that in court. And, please support me. And please support me on this, crowdfunding site or whatever. You'd think that would, be a stand worth taking, to stand up to J.K. Rowling, the evil, bigot who hates trans people. You can stand up to her and, maybe you'll lose, but you'll make a heroic stand. Isn't that, if these people actually had conviction, wouldn't that be something that would appeal to them? And I say all of this because I strongly suspect this is what would happen in the event that a gender-critical person faced these issues. I mean, there already is. I mean, we already know that gender-critical people have had to go to court on issues surrounding this. But let's just imagine something very specific. Let's suppose a celebrity takes issue with something a gender-critical person says, and they say, this is libel, and I'm going to sue you for it. Don't you think that gender-critical people would actually take a stand? Because I would say even some of the people who, they're not content producers, they're not people with tens of thousands of followers or whatever else, but they talk about this and they care about this. I would imagine even those people would care enough that they would make a quite sincere attempt to make a stand. And they would say, and they would reach out to gender-critical content creators, gender-critical people who have a larger platform. They say, hey, I'm being sued by this person. Can you please do something to help? And I imagine lots of gender-critical people would be like, yes, of course, we're going to take a stand with you on this. And we're going to, try to start crowdfunding. We're going to bring attention to your case, stuff like that. I don't see how this wouldn't happen. I think it would happen. And then obviously the people would fight the case. And if, and in this case, I imagine they probably would have a decent odds of winning, because I imagine that whatever the celebrity was objecting to would in fact not be libelous at all. Then obviously they'd win and it would be great. And if they lost, well, you'd still make that stand. I think a lot of gender-critical people would be happy to make that stand. And personally, I can say, as a little kind of pledge, if anybody, I'm not a huge person with a massive platform or anything, but I will say that if anybody ever tries to sue me for libel, if, TRA tries to sue me for libel, then I will take that stand. You aren't going to see me tweet hey guys, I said this, but I'm sorry about it. It was a lie, just because I'm, too, well, lack the conviction to actually fight my case. Now, it is possible, I will admit, I have said things which could probably be called libelous before, probably. And it's possible I would say something in the future. I might get angry, and I might say something which genuinely does misrepresent what somebody says. And in that event, obviously, I would hope the person would be as kind of courteous as J.K. Rowling and just hit me hey, this is actually not okay. You are actually misrepresenting me. And, I'm going to give you an opportunity to take it down. And I would take it down because I'd be like, actually, yeah, that is right. That is, libel. And to be fair, I have the advantage of having quite a strong idea of what is libel. Although obviously there are always going to be areas of subjectivity. But I kind of am anticipating that a lot of the time somebody actually ever did try to sue me for something I said, that it would be something which I completely stand by and actually think, no, it's completely fine for me to have said that. And in that event, yeah, I think I'd fight that. And I think that a lot of other gender critical people would too. And I think that kind of just shows the difference between convictions and grifts. Like, when it's something you actually stand by and care about versus when it's something you're just doing for clout and followers and possibly even money sometimes. Ultimately, gender critical people don't have the system on our side. We do, particularly in the UK, sometimes have significant wins, and those wins are worth celebrating, those wins are worth having some hope in, and that's one reason why it does make sense to try and fight these cases. But obviously we could lose, and certainly Maya Forstater literally had somebody say that her beliefs weren't worthy of respect in a democratic society, but she kept fighting, and ultimately, there was justice in that case. And I do think, as much as there are issues in the UK, justice can actually be hoped for in most cases, and a kind of sensible, reasonable ruling can be expected in a lot of instances. So yeah, by all means, take this as a genuine kind of oath, if you like. If I ever get sued by somebody for something I've said, if I issue a retraction, it will be because I genuinely actually recognize that something I said was misrepresentative. And I might do that. Like I say, I can't guarantee that I won't. But if I actually believe in what I said, if I believe what I said was correct, then I will take a stand. And when I see somebody like this individual who took J.K. Rowling out of context, then going back and retracting what he said and saying, no, actually, I'm sorry, I didn't really mean it. To me, that says that either he actually does admit that he was wrong, or else he doesn't really have any conviction or any integrity when it comes to standing by what he believes. So that's what it tells me. And of course, this isn't just about me, so I want to say that the reason I say this partially is because I have such confidence in the gender critical community that people will stand by each other, that there will be solidarity, that people will help each other out. And of course, not only am I saying that I would take this stand, but also if somebody else had to take a stand because they were being sued for what they said, again, it's possible that I might actually look at it and say, actually, no, I think that you were misrepresenting this person. That's a possibility, like I say. But if I think, no, actually, yeah, you were right, I stand by what you said and you're right to stand by what you said, I would do everything I could to help that person out. And I think that's just the kind of community we have. And I think the reason we have such a strong, cohesive community when it comes to our kind of respect and care for each other is because it is built on foundations that actually give us meaningful convictions and integrity. So that's the end of the video. Please do like, share, and subscribe. Comment to let me know what you think. And if you want to give on Patreon, then you can, and I'll just say thank you to my current patrons. In addition to the names scrolling past, I'd like to give a special thanks to last month's new patrons, Helen, Jupe, Lialinks, Ute, Jane, Nikita, Eve, Red Wolf, and Port. You're all very appreciated.